My friend Frank Mosely is one of the most ubiquitous actors in the indie film world today. I feel like every time I talk about a movie or look somebody up that was in something, I find yet another movie that Frank was in. In addition to his amazing work on camera, he's also an accomplished writer and director in his own right. So I was excited to talk to him about this unique perspective and to talk to him about directing from the point of view of an actor. I think in the gap between director and actor, there can sometimes be a lot of miscommunication and misunderstanding. And it was really interesting to sit down with Frank and break some of that down. It was a super interesting conversation, and I'm really excited for you to watch it. So without further ado, here is my chat with Frank Mosely. So I think you have such a unique perspective because you're both a writer, director, and an actor. Which one of those things came first for you?
They were all intertwined. And because I was a kid. And so for me, there was no distinction because it was all the same job title, which is you're making a movie, you're a filmmaker. That means you write the script, means you act in it, means you had to get behind the camera and pick out the shot, just like all the shots you love in movies. So I started making movies when I was 4 years old. My dad, he had a Sony Handycam Hi8 camera on loan from his brother-in-law. And my mom was out of town for some reason, and he was bored. And so he looked at me one day, he's like, "You want to make a movie?" And so we made The Wizard of Oz, a recreation of The Wizard of Oz, and I played all the parts, except for my dad. He played like the witch's guard. He has like one line, it's like, "You killed her, the witch is dead." And that put like the bug in me to where I was like, okay, like I can, he played it back for me immediately after we made this movie. And I was 4 years old, and I remember watching it and going, wait a minute, it was computing. We just shot that. We just did it. Now I'm seeing myself. I'm like, oh, this is great. It's like the movies I love to watch. And so then by the time I was 7 or 8, I was manning the camera, coming up with the stories, and then using my cousins and my best friends to make these movies, you know?
I feel like that's such a common way in for people, but usually some people, like myself included, will pick like one direction or another. Like, how did you keep going on all the paths at once?
That's a good question. I mean, I still think even now it's like I love to write, I love to direct, I love to edit, I love to act. But in college, I remember a good friend of mine in college, because I was an English lit major, but I was also a film major too, so I double majored, and I was doing too much. I was doing everything because they make you learn, thankfully, to wear so many hats. At least when I went to school, University of Texas at Arlington, they're like, the more you know about how to light, do a 3-point lighting system, or the more you know how to edit. Doesn't mean you have to do that forever, but then when you're making a film, you can at least have a communication with those department heads and know what you're talking about. And it's true. I mean, so they really got our hands in the muck. There was no like theory for 2 years, and then you shoot. It's like immediately, you're just day one, they gave us a 3-chip camera of first year film school. Like, go out, shoot something, see you in 20 minutes. And because of that, it kind of got you thinking you could do it all, especially at that age, So from the time I was like 18 to 20 in college, 21. And I overdid it. There was a period of time where I was like doing everything because everybody was making movies. So I'm like, oh yeah, sure, I'll help art direct. Sure, I'll be the AD. Sure, I'll AD again. Sure, I'll edit your film. And then pretty soon you're doing all this stuff and you're running yourself ragged. And I realized at one point, a buddy of mine, he turned to me and he's like, Frank, it would behoove you if you pick something to like focus on. And so I cut everything out. I said, I don't really need to AD. There are better ADs. I don't need to art direct. There are better art directors. But I want to tell stories that I come up with. So I want to write and I want to direct and I want to act. And so the editing has always been the fourth thing that was always kind of on the side. You could argue that sometimes you're always producing, depending on what level that is. Not necessarily on the money end, but just on the logistical putting together a film, But eventually, yeah, I'd say probably my early 20s, I put that focus on trying to be a filmmaker, writer, director, and then an actor. But for the longest time and up till COVID, for the most part, I tried to keep those things separate from each other.
Did you not study acting in college?
I didn't.
Have you had any formal training?
No. I went to, I did high school theater, but that was really, that was revealing because, I was used to putting on plays in my living room as a kid and, and making movies already by the time I was in high school. But in high school, I immediately was like, okay, I want to do theater. Like I like plays. But I realized that for me, the theater started to blend with the film. And so the people that I would meet in my theater class, I'd use them on the weekends to be in my mob movie that I'd shoot on Sunday or something, And so it was a real cross pollination for me. And I think that was important because it made me realize, oh, you can do both. You can do all these different things. It doesn't have to just be film. But with the acting in theater, it was a different type of acting. It was high school theater. And already I felt the pushing against what I was, I think, kind of instinctively doing as a kid who was raised on movies was acting for the camera. If you're making movies since you're 7 or 8 years old and all of a sudden you're 15, 16 doing theater and they want you to be big and reach that back seat in the auditorium, you're like, okay, I got to kind of relearn, retrain my brain in a way.
How did you develop the tools if you didn't sort of pick them up in a academic setting?
I think, well, I mean, with theater in high school, that was interesting because I said, oh, okay, this is a new version of acting. I read a lot of plays. I always read a lot of books. Like, even though I've never had any formal training, I always read books on the craft, and I watch a lot of movies, and I watch a lot of interviews. I'm a Q&A hound, unlike my wife. But I love it all, and I love just delving in and learning about process. And I had a lot of friends like outside of college who were real big into subscribing to a particular sect. And like, this is my method, this is my thing. And I don't subscribe to any of that. And the thing that I love is that I call it grocery store shopping. And basically, depending on the role, depending on the movie, depending on the time I'm at in my life, I may use some from Meisner or use some from, Stella Adler or not, or from things I've read about clowning in the ages or whatever it might be. And I just try to combine it for the character. And I have lots of conversations with the director, whatever project I'm on. I'm a, sometimes I'm sure I can be annoying, but I ask so many questions because to me, the most valuable time you have is in pre-production where you can just talk, have phone calls, meet for coffee and talk and talk and talk and talk. Because I know as a filmmaker, once you get on set, you don't always have that luxury. You just got to be ready to shoot. So as long as you have that ammunition in your pocket, you're ready to go. As long as you've done your preparation for it. Because I love physical elements of performance. I just think I've changed a little as I've gotten a little older, but generally I'm an outside in actor.
What does that look like usually?
Technically, you could say everybody starts inside and then goes out because when you're reading the script, your mind's already working. From the minute you read the scripts, you're already inside. Technically, you're thinking about the existential nature of the character you're playing or what's happening. But as soon as I do that first reading, I'm always thinking about what can I do with my physicality to make it distinct from Frank. And it could be my voice. It could be, the rhythm. It could be the timbre of my voice. It could be the how I walk or just my facial hair. But sometimes one of those things for me as the actor can do so much mileage in terms of me feeling comfortable in the role and not feeling too close to me in a way. And I think some people rely on that as a crutch. It can get, sloppy if you just really want this thing. And sometimes I think I used to go looking for it more. And then as I've gotten a little older, I'm times where I'm like, I don't have to have that thing. Gary Oldman, Lon Chaney, these actors are great at being chameleons. But then you have actors like Philip Seymour Hoffman, who they don't really change their look that much. And yet they seem like entirely different people the way they embody it so much on the inside. They don't have to look so different on the outside as well. That's just icing on the cake, if they want it. And so I've kind of started thinking about both of those spheres the older I've gotten.
That's interesting that you say that because I think when you think of physical acting, people probably think of like Nicolas Cage or like people that go so big. but it's a good reminder that it doesn't necessarily need to be that way.
Like, I think you can be an extremely physical actor in a small way. Like, sometimes you being a physical actor is the negation of the physicality. So, like, you being still is you doing the inverse of the physicality. And for a lot of my late 20s, early 30s, there were some roles I did where I would just explore, like, how still I could be while still emoting and letting something be felt, hopefully palpable by the audience. And it was an interesting exercise just to see, like, how much you could do. And I told a story to a buddy of mine recently. It just made me think of it. But I was on a movie called Some Beast where I played a farmer. And the first issue I had with that movie is that I kept trying to go and thinking, how do I change up my look and do all this stuff to not be Frank? And it dawned on me one day, it hit me. I was like, why am I working so hard at this when I'm already not Frank, because this character is not me. He's a farmer and he rides a motorcycle and, like, he does all this stuff that, like, I don't do. So, like, that's already intrinsic. Like, don't work so hard. Like, it's already there. But the element that went with that was me realizing that the stillness that I could give is always going to be an exercise till the day I die of, like, how much you're actually giving out and how much the audience is projecting onto you. There's this thing, if you've heard of the Kuleshov effect,
Mm.
but there's like a still moment of somebody on film and they're just staring blankly, no expression. And if you do a montage, if you cut to what it seems they're looking at, it's a baby being born. And all of a sudden the audience thinks that person's thinking one thing. But then instead of a baby, you might do a shot of, like, a house burning down and that face says something else. And so it's all about that montage of, like, the editing back to back that does the work. And the person is simply this, like, blank canvas for projection. And I find that really interesting. But then I'm also thinking, you can feel it deeply internalized, but, like, is it going to be felt? Because I think when you're really, truly alone and there's nobody around you in a room, do you really, like, go, oh, man, you do a little smile? Like, you don't do that for the audience. That's your gift to them, So for me, that's always an interesting exercise to play with. It's like how little you can give. I'm really into economy, even as a director. Like, I'm just in, like, how little can you do and get away with something? That's the ultimate dare for me. And I think maximalism is cool, but I'm really into minimalism. Doesn't mean I want to have fun sometimes and, like, go crazy. I went through periods of always playing these kind of quiet, internalized characters. And then, like, last 6-7 years, I had friends who wrote me these roles that were all a little wilder and bigger and expressive and emotive. And that was fun to get to kind of do these different characters,
Does your acting influence the way that you direct films?
Yeah, I think so. I think it works the other way too. Yeah. I think they just, they each feed off each other and hopefully make me, I hope, better in both departments and both sides, because I grew up with both of them at the same time. I have a hard time I couldn't cut one arm off. It's like they need each other. So I think it certainly informs my choices. I would say as an actor, it makes it difficult that I'm a filmmaker sometimes because my filmmaker brain kicks on and I gotta turn it off. I got to immediately just, like, trust enough in who's directing and in your script to just let them do the thing, and all I ask sometimes, like, what's the frame? Is I know how to play it. How are we going to shoot? What angle are we doing for? I ask very technical questions, but all for my performance to know how to calibrate it.
Yeah.
If you give everything you have emotionally on one take, that's fine if they're doing a oneer for the scene and they're doing only 1 or 2 takes. But if they're shooting, you have an emotional breakdown with 6 angles and 2 or 3 takes per angle, you're fucked. Like, you really gotta, like, know, what you want. You gotta know how to keep bringing back that illusion of the first time,
When you've been acting on other people's projects, have you observed them directing you or other actors and sort of internalize that for, like, when you direct? For instance, like, are you seeing somebody do something and you're like, oh, I'm definitely not going to do that next time I direct a movie?
Yeah, I think I'm not real big into trickery. And I think that's a fine line, and what I mean by that, it's not even that it's really a terrible thing by any means, but I mean, like, something as simple as, like, you're doing a scene and instead of the direction being heard by all to both actors in the scene. The director's like, he's like, Frank, come here. Like, this is what I want you to think about. I want you to think about, like, last week you did this thing that we really, blah, blah, blah. And then he goes, the other actor, hey, come here for a second. What I want you to do is, blah, 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 blah. And, and it's almost like you're prepped to see what the other person is going to throw you because now they're getting direction that you can't know. But that's really what acting should be anyway. Like, when you go into a scene, you should always be present and always be listening and not anticipating your line, because you should be living in that space. Your line is in the back of your head. But some directors really thrive on that. Like, in some ways, they like to keep people on their toes and almost keep them at odds with each other, the other actors, like in order to create a sense of imbalance and tension. Whether that's good or bad or not, that's just not for me. And even when I direct, I like to be very transparent with everybody in the scene. I'm like, this is what you're doing. This is what I'm doing. This is what I'm doing. And the only time I'll take you aside personally is if you're having trouble with the scene, or if I'm like, let's like talk about this, but like not as just a way to add more fray to it. That's not what I'm into.
I feel like sometimes directors do like tricks in order to elicit a certain performance, and seemingly because they don't trust that an actor can like get there, knowing everything or using the tools that they have. Like, if you like do something to make an actor cry, which is like borderline abusive, it's like the actor can get there on their own. You just need to like trust that
absolutely
they have the ability to do that.
I one time was on a film, which I won't name, but the director on take one fired a gun. It was a thing that wasn't live ammunition, but it was blank still. But it was a blanks, but fired it in the air to get a reaction from me. And he's like, I just wanted to see you jump, like see you, a real response. And I'm like, I was responding to the director firing a gun.
Right.
Not to how I would respond if you just gave me a chance. We haven't shot a real take yet, like of how I would respond to the thing.
And this was the first take.
This first take of all takes. It wasn't even like, and I'm not saying that it was good either way if he did that, but I'm saying it wasn't even like I was having trouble. Like, it wasn't like he's like, oh God, what do? I got to resort to this, none of that. It was take one, So I'm very, I don't know, I'm just very sensitive to that and letting actors do their job. And again, if you had those conversations ahead of time, you should trust them and know what they can do, and know that you should know it when you cast them, know their limits or know their range or know what they can do. Like, talk about it. I think that's all part of that conversation again, which is so intrinsic.
Well, when you're having this conversation, what kinds of things are you looking for from a director when you take on a movie?
I mean, there's a lot, honestly. I mean, one, there's like the logistical stuff we don't have to get into, which is like, how like, is this shot in chunks? Is this shot in one time? What's your process like as a director? Like, how do you like to work? Do you like improvisation? Do you like to stick to the script? Do you stick to the lines? How are you shooting this? Like, knowing, what's the style of the movie? Is it like a, handheld Andrea Arnold movie? Are we watching American Honey? Or is it like static shot, Michael Haneke, you act in the frame, like anthropological? Like, because that can dictate how you do your performance. There are some roles that I've came on to fairly late, like whereas I got cast and like, okay, we're seeing 5 days. And I have an idea how I want to play the character, but in that short amount of time, I make another way to play the character so that when I get to set, based on how the other actor, my partner, is going to be, like if that's meaning like if that partner throughout the whole movie, if we're like a duo, right? If I see, oh, they're giving me that, I have to pick this version, to do the scene so that it's a nice yin yang. It's a counteract. It's a foil to that character.
Are you saying a way to approach it, or like a performance? So
performance, maybe, if you don't have the prep time. So like, for example, I did Jeff Marslett's Quantum Cowboys, this movie. And they were trying to, it's me and David Arquette as like the two bad guys. And they were trying to get a name before they had Arquette attached. They were trying to get a name. And the only way I was going to get cast, I found out later, was if they had a name. Because they needed somebody bigger so they could have me as an unknown next to David Arquette to make that work. That was the deal. So the director was fighting for me, and he's like, I think, we're going through people. Some said no, but I think we can get David Arquette if he says yes. But this is all about logistics. So like who we're getting, and we're days out. So it's not even about the character. You know, it's not like the farm film where I had a year to prepare and get to know my love and interest in that film, and we like would call each other all week long and like talk into the night like we were long distance lovers. Like there was like none of that. This was 5 days getting ready to shoot. And so I had two versions of my character in my head because they're a duo, but technically my character's kind of the sidekick a little, but they're pretty close, right? And they're never without each other. So I thought, let's see what Arquette does. Because if Arquette comes in and he's a little more, you know, wild, like he's the Joker, then I'm going to temper my performance to be the opposite. So that you see these two need each other, you know, and that my guy's a little more scary and calm and cold. And like you never know when he's going to snap. But what ended up happening was what I suspected, which was David came in and he played it like he was the hard ass, like he was the one kind of in charge. So I immediately leaned into like, I'm the fucking, you know, wild card. Like I look crazy, like I'm losing my mind, and I'm very physical and very loose, and like I'm like a scarecrow, like just like every movement I did was like he's just dancing circles around Arquette as they walk and talk together. He's just like constant, like he's high on cocaine, you know, and that created a nice, interesting contrast between us. But I didn't know what was going to happen until I saw what Arquette was going to give me, you know, and I knew I could give something no matter what. And that's, again, only because we didn't have the prep time to talk about the character. And then once we did the very first scene, Jeff looked at me and he was like, you got, like, you're doing great. But then sometimes you would be like, give me, like, make him even wilder. Like, really go for broke. And I was like, all right, why not? What do I got to lose, you know?
I mean, it's always interesting. You hear about actors who do a lot of television or they kind of pop into like series. And in situations like that, you have to be ready to roll like from take one. Like there's no time to develop and sort of like, you know, revel in the process. It's just like, okay, action, you have to like nail it.
Yeah.
Some sets you can show up and it's like, well, let's work through it. Let's all talk about the characters. And then other times, like you said, you're like, you know, we're shooting in 5 days. Like we have to like have this shit ready to roll.
Absolutely. And you got David Arquette for only 3 days. You know, it's like we have to shoot all your scenes out in 3 to 5 days or whatever it is. And it's green screen and you're in wardrobe and it's, you know, below freezing in Colorado in a non-heated warehouse. So it's like all these elements, suddenly it's like all about just shooting the scene. And the character in the process just, in a weird way, almost takes a backseat. And you're just like, I just got to get through the scene. So as soon as I made a decision, the scene one's like, I can't change it now. Like, that's the character I am now. I have to go full speed ahead, like it or not, because I have to be consistent.
Wow.
You know? And if it's not working, I know Jeff will tell me. Or I have to trust in Jeff that he'll tell me.
Yeah.
You know? And that is everything. I think trusting your director is everything. Everything. And I want to be trusted as a filmmaker. Like, when I have actors, I mean, I like to think of it as like, you know, we're all a team. But if anything, it's like I feel like a parent of the team. I want to protect everybody. I want them to feel safe and I want them to feel excited. You know, it's like, come on, kids, we're all going to Disneyland. Like I'm, you know, looking in the rearview mirror and I want everybody to be on board for the vacation, you know.
I mean, that's a great approach. I don't think most directors are comfortable or experienced enough to feel that way. And have you ever experienced kind of the opposite of that, where directors are scared to talk to actors or don't necessarily know what to say or feel intimidated by them?
Absolutely. I mean, yeah, there's a lot of directors I've worked with who they don't know how to talk to actors, but they try sometimes. And I appreciate that because like they're like, look, I don't know what exactly it is you do, or like I don't know how you're gonna get me with you, but like you can just tell me, dude. Like if you need, like, do you need to go in another room by yourself, or like what do you need to do? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Like let's talk about, you know. But like I appreciate the thought is what matters, is the trying. Because then the opposite is that even though it's nice to have directors who also act, that can be dangerous because then sometimes the acting can take a precedence over maybe the schedule or the shot or the technical aspect of the film, you know? And I really do think, you know, that a perfect blending of the two that's filmmaking. I mean, to me, it's like understanding the lighting and the frame, that every part of the film It all comes together to create that big picture. And the actors are just a part of it. They're not everything. And I love saying that as an actor. And honestly, I love being in art films where like you don't see my face and you see the back of my head. Like if it's a vision I believe in and it's artistically interesting, I'd rather be in that movie than just be in a movie where you see me talking all the time, but I'm not crazy about the script. There's just a lot of actors that I've met, in the industry who are so focused on actors or themselves as actors in a film when they make a film. So it's as much about their face as it is about the movie. Whereas to me, those are entirely separate things.
What's the worst direction you've got from a director?
Sometimes you've heard stories where actors say the worst directions, like if you can just say, more or less or things like that. But actually, I like that. It's a real simple command, and for somebody who especially doesn't have the actor speak with you, I get it. Like I'll try to give you more or less depending. I can try to feel out the room and the take and what's happening. Okay, I think they want like less of this, and I'll try that, and I find that helpful, actually. I think that the more economical you can be with your direction on set, the better. The least amount of words, the better. In pre-pro, we can gab all night over coffee. I love just talking. We can bring up philosophy and how that ties in and the state of the world, all these things. I love that stuff, Like you can show me a painting and say, your character is embodied in this painting I saw at the Met. Like, this is what I want. I'm like, great. Like, that's the stuff that I love. That's the actor nerd in me. But it's also the filmmaker in me. It's like sees that whole picture. That it's not just about what I do on the day. It's not just about a close-up,
I feel like it's probably the same with acting, but with video editing, I'm sure any video editor can tell you, is so much a part of your job, and working with producers is fielding feedback and trying to interpret shitty feedback. Like if somebody gives you a really bad note, part of your job is to sort of decode that and figure out what they actually want when they say, they want it to be more fun or something. You have to, and I feel like acting is maybe similar to that, because a lot of directors maybe aren't the most lucid communicators when it comes to talking to actors. And I've noticed the really good actors are the ones who don't like sort of lash out when they hear bad feedback. They kind of are like, okay, like you were saying, you're like, okay, yeah, I think I know what you want. And so I'm going to calibrate in my own way internally and do something differently.
I think you just made me think of something. I think the thing that the worst direction is actually when they don't give. You do multiple takes of the same shot, but they're not telling you what it's for. So are they wanting something different from you? If they just go, okay, we're rolling again, and you're like, is that the right direction? And you do take 5. And they're not saying, it's not even that you want a pat on the back. I want to know, like, does that mean you want me to do something different?
Right.
Or lean into a feeling more? But if you don't tell me anything, then I don't know. Is it a technical issue with the lighting and the camera? Like, as long as you tell me what's happening, because my issue too as an actor is like, if I don't hear anything, I get bored with how I'm doing the scene. So then I want to start potentially shaking it up, like in the performance, and be like, well, let me try this, because I like every line to feel real the first time anyway, if I can help it. But also sometimes you find a line a certain way as a specific character that might come out, you want that to come out again in the next take, but you don't want it to feel canned and repeated after take 3. So after take 3 or 4, then I'm like, well, I may do this entirely different and shake it up. But then is it going to be consistent with the character I'm creating? So as long as they tell me this is why we're doing another take, that's important to me.
When you're directing, though, say something just isn't kind of quite right and you just want to try it a few more times, but you're not exactly sure. There's not like a big note to give. How do you handle that? Do you just kind of tell them the focus was off or something and you just want to do it again?
No, I'll just tell them the truth, and I'll just be like, you know what? Like, that was great. Like, let's just do one just to get, like, but saying it in that tone of that, we have stuff that works, but let's just try it again. Let's like try a new one. And it's like, try something different this time. Sometimes I'm like, throw it all away. Like, forget that and let's do something new. Because otherwise, if I know there's an issue or something that I'm not crazy about as a director, I will give a very specific note. And I think that goes back to like me as a director is I like to communicate as much as possible. Like I want transparency in that way. I don't want to do a thing where like, I'm not going to say anything. I'm going to see how you just, what you do in this. I'm like, no, by take 10, if you're not saying anything, it's like, I got to know something,
Right.
you know? Because then it's just mysterious. It's a question mark. And then you start thinking about what's happening and why, you know, and again, it doesn't have to be like, oh, that was brilliant, like, you know, whatever, or that, you know, or that sucks. Either way, just tell us like, hey, if you need like a change up, tell us what that is, you know.
So when you start a movie as an actor, what are you doing to prepare for the role?
It really depends on the part, you know. Is it a character who has a trade that I don't know anything about? Do I have to learn that trade? If it's something like that, then I need to start immediately to where when I'm on screen, it just feels like, you know, I can do it, you know, subconsciously as I'm talking in the scene and I'm, you know, whittling. I can whittle without it being like I've never whittled before, you know. So that's number one is like, what is the aspect of the character that might need some work, some preparation on a physical level. And then I really just read the script over and over and over and understand the beats and the arc of the character. And if it all makes sense to me, then I start memorizing because I'm a fairly slow memorizer. I've gotten faster in the last few years because I've been auditioning more. But generally, it's like I get a little rusty, and so then even with lines for film, it takes a long time for me to really get them down, and I want to have them down so well that you know it's really the back of your hand. So I really focus on the lines. I pace around, take long walks, saying the lines to myself, and listening to music that has to do either with from the world of that character or songs that I think mean something to that character or songs that that character would listen to. And I just absorb it. When I was prepping for Quantum Cowboys for Jeff's movie, I watched a lot of Looney Tunes and I listened to a lot of Marty Robbins. That was my prep. When I did this movie, The Ghost Who Walks, I played this scarred up, like New York wannabe pimp character. He's a total rat, like in the crime world. And I listened to a lot of just like Euro trash techno music and Sinatra Christmas songs. And I listened to them like one after the other. Like I do a total 180 change to match this character's high and low energy. And I just paced around and just like go over the lines and 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 listen to the music. And then as that's happening, but it kind of after is when I really start thinking, like as I'm saying the lines, I start like moving my body and be like, how does this character walk? How do they sound? Do they hold eye contact easily? Do they not? Do I talk in my throat? Do I talk in my gut? Do I talk in my, do I walk with my chest out? Do I walk tall? Do I walk kind of shoulders? All these little details of the character that start adding up.
And you're consciously
creating.
Checking these things off?
Yeah. But it's also all, again, based from the script. You get a character and, generally you have an idea of the character. And like, oh, if this character is a certain way, it's not like I'm working entire magic because, like, if they're written as, like, a guy who's downtrodden, yeah, you might think your shoulders are slumped, But then you try to think, okay, how can I also maybe put a spin on a character that's written a certain way and not make it feel tired or cliched in the thing. And that's a tough thing to do. And that's also a trap because then you can find yourself trying so hard to come up with an interesting thing. This goes back to my issue I would have like trying to not be frank. That then I'm like, well, just do the scene. I have these auditions, and one time my wife Jocelyn said one time she said what you did was great in that scene. She goes, but like sometimes like you're just the bank teller. Like you're literally just like you're not going through your own existential crisis. Like you're just the bank teller, and you serve your purpose for the larger whole for that character, and then you move on. But when you prepare for the scene, you want to be able to have something in your head towards not just the task. Doesn't mean it has to necessarily come out. Goes to the Kuleshov thing again. But like, if you're feeling it, you never know what can be picked up on. by the audience, and they're like, "Oh, that was a little interesting. Like something was up with that bank. He was in like that guy was kind of interesting, you know. Like he did the job of the scene. He did the money exchange, but it's like there was something like he stood out in a as interesting way, but not in a way that would distract. Because last thing you want to do is showboat or scene steal.
So, I mean, every actor has like a different approach and needs different things. How do you feel is the best way for a director to suss these things out from different actors?
It's like knowing a lot of languages, because when you hire a cast, everybody has a different methodology as an actor. Some people are non-actors. Some people, it's your dad who's never acted. It could be a range of people. And so your job, the seemingly insurmountable task that you have to be is like an orchestrator of these voices. And you have to somehow get them to work. And it's tricky. It's like the stories you always hear where some actors, they start off, they're a little shaky on the first couple of takes. By take 5, they're flying. And then you get other actors come in, first take, brilliant. And then they start to peter out by take 3 or 4. So you're like, okay, if it's going to be, a coverage shot or shot reverse shot, then I know that I can just intercut the best takes from this actor and the one from there. What do you do if it's a one shot? How do you help those actors prepare based on their own language of being actors? So I think that's the tricky part is like you have to have these conversations way early and be like, what works for you? How can I help you in the scene? Now, let me tell you, though, what I need from you. When I did the Ghost Who Walks, that movie, I had a really big emotional, vulnerable scene in that movie. It was a big, and it's written in the scene like this is a turning point. This has to be big and emotional. You're breaking. And I was like, well, I basically got to do a version of that. And Cody, the director, was kind enough to be like, hey, he's like, this is how we're shooting it. What do you need from me? And what's going to help you? And then the other actors, like, what can I do? Because every actor knows, there's no small parts. Every actor is important in the scene. I get it. But there are scenes like this is this actor's scene. And the other actors, they are supporting that actor's scene. So in this movie, this was one of my big scenes. And the lead actor of the film knew that. So he told me, he's like, this is you tell me, what do you need from me? And it takes a lot of humility and a lot of understanding of the craft for the lead actor of the film to look at his fellow actor and be like, I get it. Like, I get the overall big picture, and to have that conversation. So it's really all it comes down to is those talks and being like, making sure, okay, how do we try to align ourselves with a common language, a common tongue,
Kind of going back a little bit, when you get approached by a director or offered a role, are there certain things that you're looking for that get you excited about taking something on?
Absolutely. Number one is that I haven't done it before. That's number one, which is tough because you can easily get typecast. I have this whole thing. It's like you're only as good as the last movie they saw you in, and they only think most people only know what you can do based on the last movie they saw you in, and that's how they see you. So if you play a scumbag in the last movie, they're going to be okay. He's going to be a scumbag, and so you really have to always prove yourself as an actor, which is tough. It keeps you sharp, keeps you working, but you have to prove to people what your range is and what you can do. Like, remember this movie I did 10 years ago? That's what I think you want from me in this new film you're about to cast. But I know that was 10 years ago, but I got to prove it to you now. And so it's always finding a role that's fresh and unique that I would love to do. There's feelings that I just did a movie last fall there, and I did this movie out in Texas set in a monastery, and I had feelings in a scene, and it sounds really like I don't know, cliched or something, or like I'm being over the top, but there were feelings I just felt in the scene that I had never felt before in another movie. Now, I don't know how that translates on screen, but acting the scenes, there were just feelings where I was like, oh, like I felt things. It wasn't another breakup scene. It wasn't another trying to get the job scene. It wasn't, betraying somebody. It was like something that was new and it was fresh. And I was like, it gave me this reinvigoration. So I'm always looking for emotions or characters that I've never done before. But also, and this feels like a kid playing dress up, like types I've never done before. If I'm honest, like, yeah, I'd love to be a prosecutor in a courtroom drama and come in a suit, you know, and come in and be like, this guy, you know, like, you know, really just like grandstand and like get in their faces. And, you know, that would be great. I would love to play a doctor, a kindly doctor. I don't know. You know, there's all these types that I would love to play, but you can't always go based on type.
Filmmakers, listen up. Frank
That's right.
wants to play a lawyer and a doctor.
I always wanted to play Harry Houdini in a biopic. We're similar heights, and I mean, I have to get in shape and hold my breath underwater. But you know, that'd be a biopic character I'd love to play. You know, there's certain things you keep in mind, like, oh, if something comes along that's of a subject you like. Sometimes it goes back to what I said earlier. It does come back to, like, if there's a trade that I've always been interested in, like, oh, the character does it, I get to learn the trade and play the character, you know, and do the thing at the same time. So you're killing two birds with one stone. Some of the other reasons are like simply working with certain people. I mean,
filmmakers or actors or both.
Both, yeah. There's times where, like, I'll say I will do this movie because in my head, every time I take on a role, there's like check boxes that we'll see how many I check to say yes or not. You know, so one is like, is it a great script? Is it a director I want to work with? Are there other actors involved I wanted to work with? Is it shooting in a really cool country or city that I've never been? Is there a trade that I have to learn that's interesting? Or is it a type of character that I want to play that I've never played? And all those things factor in.
So, I mean, I'm just really curious between the dynamic of you being an actor and a director, having experience on both sides of the camera. Do you think in your experience as an actor, you would have advice for directors when it comes to casting actors?
I think directors need to really think about their reasons for also casting somebody for the overall reason for making the movie. What I mean by this is your goal to sell it? Is your goal to get it on streamers? Is your goal just to make it for yourself? Are you going to put a name actor in it? These are all things that you think about when you're casting your movie, and you need help for that. But I do think that how you cast your actors is going to be based on what your goals are for the movie. And I think, you know, at the end of the day, I think it's getting the right person who's right for the role. It doesn't matter how many followers they have on Instagram. It doesn't matter if their name or whatever. Like, if you're good in the role, you're good in the role. Now, it might change if you're really trying to sell this thing. You're like, I want to go to Sundance. I want to get it sold for this amount of money, and I want to get it on Hulu. Like, that's a different thing. So you got to make sure your reasons for casting are aligned with your reasons for making the movie. Because you don't want to be casting the movie a certain way, but then when you talk about your goals for making the movie, you're like, these things don't add up.
In your capacity as an actor, are there things that you get frustrated with directors, or something you wish all directors sort of knew?
You know, there's a stigma with actors of you know, like that they're precious, you know, and they're like fragile little Russian doll you gotta delicately put down, and maybe some are on an individual level, but I think actors actually are I mean, fucking, they got thick skin. Their life is rejection. You know, they're not as fragile as you think. They're constantly getting told that they're not right for something, and they're constantly trying to prove themselves. Like, there's nobody better who has that energy in them to want to, like, really push harder, and they want to give you what you want. And I think as a director, I think knowing that, like, the director should be there to help you get where you need to be, and you make sure you tell the director that you're there to make them happy, like to give them what they want to be.
Please make sure that you check out some of Frank's work both in front of and behind the camera. I've linked to some of the films down below, and I've also linked to his website where you can see the many things that he's got going on at any given time. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope that you found it helpful, and I will see you in the next one.